Hi, my name is Jacob Moore. Today I'm going to be talking about how composers like Beethoven, Mahler, and Mozart changed the precedent for how brass instruments, and more specifically the trombone, are used within the orchestral setting. I'll use audio recordings from professional orchestral sections, and I will play an excerpt myself to demonstrate different excerpts from different time periods. Over time, we have seen a drastic change in how orchestral music was written. And in this episode of the podcast, we'll talk about how the trombone began to be utilized in the orchestra, and how composers have changed the idea of how the trombone section is used, and what the trombone looks like today. The first thing to talk about would be what the orchestral scene looked like during the late 18th and early 19th century. During this time period, the orchestra was on a smaller side when it came to the total number of musicians. The numbers of players per section would range depending on what piece they were performing. And so, as time went on though, composers started to follow the trend of having sections compiled of violins, violas, cellos, and double basses. This was the standard for a while with things. They would sometimes have wind instruments added to bring in different colors and timbres in the orchestra. Yes, and so the orchestra started off at a smaller size because most of their performances were for the upper class, and so the spaces didn't need to be super large, just to accommodate who all would be there. But as time went on, music was becoming a lot more accessible to everyone, and so it was easier for people to get instruments and also get music, and it was more accessible to learn how to play and read music. And so with music becoming more accessible, more people were able to attend concerts, and so they needed larger concert halls, and then in that case larger orchestras to sufficiently fill up the hall with a good sound. Now, the trombone comes in early in the 17th century, as it was used for church music, and it was used. They used the sackbut, and it was used to mirror different vocal parts. Composers such as Beethoven and Mozart really liked that idea of using the instrument in that manner, and so they brought it into their orchestral writing. A perfect example from that would be two different trombone excerpts that we regularly see in the real world would be Mozart's Requiem in D minor. The first one of these excerpts being a 16th note passage that is mirroring alto and tenor voices. The first trombone part is played on the alto, while the second is played on a tenor part in most cases. This is a tenor trombone, and so it's a larger instrument, more tubing, and it gives it a darker sound compared to an alto trombone, which is smaller than this, and it gives it a lighter, more delicate sound to help accompany those higher tessitura voices. This is one of the more challenging excerpts to play due to the fact that you're trying to not only balance within the orchestra and the trombone section, but also trying to balance to the voice parts, and not trying to cover that up, but support them through the passage. There will be a link in the description featuring someone playing all three trombone parts, and you'll be able to hear just the tone difference and the timbre difference between all three iterations of the trombone. Another famous excerpt that comes from this piece is the tuba mirum solo that features the second trombone and a bass and tenor soloist. The trombone will introduce a melody, and then the bass soloist will answer back, and so I will go ahead and play just the first three measures of this piece as the opening statement for this section of the solo. bass would come in and repeat that same chant back. And so as time goes on, new composers are trying to pave their own way in this time period where it was easier to play what people already know. And most places were pretty conservative with their music, and so they were not very open to change. Beethoven was also a great influence for the use of the trombone within the orchestra. He was a pioneer, essentially, for orchestral writing, since his writing began to expand the size of the orchestra and creating a new standard for what an orchestra would look like. He added new instruments into the ensemble, regularly using the trombone in his works, and also contrabassoons and piccolos, which was something that wasn't typically seen and was added to bring in new colors to the ensemble. With this style of writing, he was changing the traditional structure of an orchestra with expressionist techniques and doing something that people were not doing. Now, moving on to another composer and a very prominent figure in the low brass world, that would be Gustav Mahler. He was a well-respected conductor of the Vienna Opera. He was also a fantastic composer who would go on to write some of the greatest symphonies that are still regularly played throughout many famous orchestras today. Mahler began his career as a conductor in Vienna, which is a very conservative place, and so when he began composing, he got tired of doing the same things all the time, and so he wanted to experiment and do something that people were not doing. And whenever he would bring his compositions to the Vienna Opera and the Vienna Orchestra, they would not want to play it just because of how different and how out of the norm that his music was. Mahler's writing, he still took influence, but it was still very different from what Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn were doing. And so Mahler eventually picked up and moved to New York, and I believe it was 1906 or 1907, where he would not have a hard time getting his music played and performed. With these places rapidly changing during this time period in America, people were much more open to newer music. The way that he was writing really changed the landscape for trombone. Mahler utilized choirs in his symphonies, and he featured the trombones in a similar manner by having similar passages to the choir, but also featuring solos and section playing and just all brass features. And whenever you listen to Mahler's symphonies, it's very brass heavy, very powerful, and a lot of emotion from his music. Mahler was writing music in a way that we were not really seeing at this time. For example, Symphony Number 8 is usually recognized as the Symphony of 1,000 due to how many musicians are called to perform this symphony. There are 2 adult choirs, a children's choir, 8 soloists, and then a very large string sections and all the instruments, and larger brass sections than we're used to seeing. A famous excerpt that comes from Mahler's repertoire for the trombone is the solo in the first movement of Mahler's Third Symphony. This symphony is interpreted by him as a grand journey exploring the relationship between humanity, nature, and the divine, with themes of life, death, and redemption that are passed around throughout the piece. And you can definitely feel the emotion that Mahler was trying to convey through the symphony, and also the trombone that is featured in this movement. When playing it, there are musical directions talking about playing super like wild and just very heavy and aggressive, which is very easy for the trombone to do due to the large nature of the instrument. And these are just a few examples of impactful composers who have helped pave the pathway for the trombone in the orchestral setting. There will also be a link in the description for a reference recording of Mahler's Third Symphony trombone solo, featured with the full orchestra. And when you listen to it, you can really understand what Mahler was trying to convey through the piece and with his writing. And the versatility of the trombone is just another factor that helped maintain or helped the trombone stay prominent in the orchestra. You can still get a very powerful and broad sound with the instrument, but you can also still maintain a soft and delicate sound whenever you're required to play softer passages. An example of a softer passage would be the beginning of the second movement of Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. It opens with a very sweet and delicate brass chorale chant-style melody, and one of the prominent voices in that is the trombone, as it is one of the only instruments that is moving through different chord changes, and it helps bring a beautiful color to the sound. So with melodies ranging from large and impactful section playing to soft and delicate solos, it's truly what gives the trombone a wide variety of ways to be in fact impactful in the orchestral setting. And that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, that is just some examples of how the trombone has helped maintain and preserve its spot in the orchestra. Thank you.